This After Dark Club is open from dusk till dawn. I have a feeling that Quentin Tarantino saw Vamp and thought, I can do this, only better. What he often thinks about most things. In a way, I would say that the two movies feed off each other. Vamp does certain things better than From Dusk Till Dawn, and vice versa. It should also be said that only half of From Dusk Till Dawn was stolen from Vamp, and that Vamp is strictly a comedy. The film would later go on to fully inspire the Tales from the Crypt entry, Bordello of Blood. I can only assume that its makers saw the popular craze of college frat guy comedies on the rise and decided to try that only with vampires, you know? The plot follows two cocky gangsters in training as they hatch a scheme to hire a stripper in order to be accepted into a fraternity. This leads them to acquire a rich loser Spaz and his vehicle, taking them deep into the city on an adventure of sorts. Yada yada yada, they meet Grace Jones and Quentin Tarantino cashes a big fat check. I have to say though, Gentlemen, I Give You Katrina is nowhere near as fancy as Santanico Pandemonium. Plus the whole truck driver thing in Mexico makes a lot more sense as far as body disposal goes. Story-wise, the writers could have come up with a better excuse for them to go into the city. As far as the ending goes, all I can say is, thank goodness that vampires have the tendency to live and sleep close to giant barrels of gasoline. Otherwise, I just don't know what our two lead heroes would have done. Positives would include the film's elevator sequence, which is a creepy and suspenseful gem of a scene. The film exists in a world where purple and green are everywhere to be seen. Whether it be in the sewers or the strip clubs or the streets of the city, everything is drenched in purple and green lights. It's quite crazy, really. The vampire design is effective, due to its taking a page from the 1980s classic, Fright Night. Lastly, if you're looking for a killer double feature, I'd say that Vamp might pair nicely with John Landis's Innocent Blood. Wormwood, Road of the Dead. One of the most enjoyable Australian genre films to come around in a long time, that's for sure. It captures the sheer manic energy of New Zealander Peter Jackson, American Stuart Gordon, and Australian legend George Miller. Director team the Roach Turner brothers explode onto the screen with a rip-roaring debut feature for the ages, oozing with gallons of blood, brains, and ingenuity. In these desperate times of rising gas prices, don't we all just wish our cars would run on honest-to-goodness zombies? Good old dependable hordes of flesh-eating zombies walk the countrysides day and night. So why not just grab one or two of them, strap them to the sides of our caddies, and put those mindless suckers to work, you know what I mean? Well, that's what the folks in this particular universe do. Because their zombies aren't your average run-of-the-mill variety. No sirree Bob. These aren't your granddad zombies. These guys are much stinkier. I'm talking methane gas stinky. So basically, if you're going to add yet another zombie movie to an already ridiculously large roll call of titles, why not try and bring something new to the table? This is a concept that Wormwood excels at, while also working as a badass action/horror flick to boot. It certainly wears its influences on its sleeve, but there's nothing wrong with that as long as there is a genuine love and respect to be found. Fortunately, it is very clear that the Roach Turner brothers are obvious genre heads. The cast is also wonderful. In every aspect of this film, you can feel the love, care, and camaraderie of its devoted team of creators at work. And given that the film's genius was thanks to a large group of backers on Kickstarter, this lets that love shine through even stronger. And thus, the 7 rip-offs began. Cary Elwes acts the shit out of everyone, although his accent does break quite often. His freak-out at the end is a piece of overacting gold. James Wan and Lee Wynell explode onto the horror scene with the most influential Australian film since Mad Max. They borrowed much from the abominable Dr. Phibes, as well as many bottle film tropes to create a tight, intriguing script. I'm not surprised that the world went nuts for it. Each and every year we had a brand new Saw film to look forward to around Halloween time. They churned these out like the hot new toy at Christmas. They should really come up with a new Halloween gimmick franchise again. I mean, Halloween used to be a movie-going holiday. You know what I'm talking about? Do you remember? Imagine that. Donnie Wahlberg is a decent actor. This is perhaps a fact that many of us are guilty of forgetting. Like, for instance, do you remember when he had a super skinny freak-out in The Sixth Sense? Well, I guess that you could say that he has an average-sized freak-out in Saw 2. The Wahlbergs are definitely capable of extreme bouts of overacting when they are so inclined. This installment of the Saw franchise has great twists and Jigsaw-designed game show traps. It is also an excellent bottle film, similar to Cube or the Twilight Zone episode 5 Strangers in Search of an Exit. Saw 2 is where the franchise gets its true birth. This is also where we get our first official introduction to the softly uttered menace that is the acting styles of Tobin Bell as Jigsaw. This franchise needs him desperately in order to survive, so the writers better hurry up and introduce a long-lost twin brother trope into the next script, otherwise I fear for its survival. Donnie Wahlberg is a decent actor. This is perhaps a fact that many of us are guilty of forgetting. Like, for instance, do you remember when he had a super skinny freakout in The Sixth Sense? Or that time he had a less than skinny freakout in Saw 3? Well, I guess that you could say that he has an average-sized freakout in Saw 2. The Wahlbergs are definitely capable of extreme bouts of overacting when they are so inclined. This installment of the Saw franchise has great twists and Jigsaw-designed game show traps. It is also an excellent bottle film, similar to Cube or the Twilight Zone episode 5 Strangers in Search of an Exit, which it was inspired by it. Saw 2 is where the franchise gets its true birth. This is also where we get our first official introduction to the softly uttered menace that is the acting styles of Tobin Bell as Jigsaw. This franchise needs him desperately in order to survive, so the writers better hurry up and introduce a long-lost twin brother trope into the next script, otherwise I fear for its survival. Escape Room is the first installment in what has now become a unique bottle film franchise, the first of its kind in fact. The Saw films were the closest we had come, but they were only part bottle film really. It being one of my favorite subgenres, I hope that this series continues for years to come, filling the gaping hole that the Final Destination films left. The script plays like the movie Cube, but more elaborate, and with a bigger budget. The cast is enjoyable, the sets are spectacular, and the puzzles are legit. I definitely enjoyed Escape Room more the second time around. Tournament of Champions is yet another strong entry in the Escape Room franchise. The rooms are even more elaborate, ranging everywhere from a beach setting to the inner city. Another strong cast rounds this one out. This is a much more positive group. It's a different dynamic from the first film, but it works nonetheless. The plot and lore of the franchise runs deep this time around. We get many more explanations and are ultimately left with another obligatory cliffhanger. And without giving too many spoilers, I'll just say that someone may become an orphan before the day is over. The zombies look awesome in this Lucio Fulci directed undead opus and unofficial sequel to George Romero's Dawn of the Not Alives. The effects team chose to give them that fresh, out-of-the-ground, earthy look. I'm actually surprised that more zombie films don't choose this approach. The screenwriter brought that voodoo angle back to the subgenre, where the Romero films were purposefully vague when explaining the cause of all the zombie mayhem. Other than one intense scene of eye gore, this film is mostly known for its zombie versus shark sequence. And why do the people love it, you might ask? Well, it's because of the fact that the scene consists of a real man dressed up as a zombie fighting a real-ass shark. The film is shot beautifully, which isn't surprising given its Italian horror pedigree. However, Zombie might be Lucio Fulci's most gratuitous film, a true exploitation film in every sense of the word. This is the cold hard truth that will make it or break it for most audiences. This is the first movie to bring the Marx Brothers to horror. We wouldn't see such blatant nods again until the late 90s when Rob Zombie would begin his Firefly trilogy. Terror Train stars Jamie Lee Curtis in one of her many 1980s slasher flicks. This one co-stars David Copperfield and is basically Halloween on a party train. The concept of a party train is pretty appealing if you ask me. The film itself is mostly mediocre. The one thing I always remember about this movie is its mind-blowing twist. It's definitely a surprising one even if it is problematic, especially by today's standards. They call it one of the few proper Thanksgiving slashers, and I suppose that's true. A Thanksgiving dinner does in fact occur, and at its core it's about the complexities of dysfunctional families. This is an 80s slasher in every sense of the term. It features awkward acting, gratuitous gore, and a twisted sense of humor. I wouldn't call this one of my favorites personally, although I do respect the rabid fanbase that this over-the-top B-horror flick has procured lately. In classic Brian De Palma's Sisters fashion, the film features mentally disturbed twins, one much crazier than the other, of course. There is also a humorously delivered line about cranberry sauce that inches this film even further into the holiday horror category.
Fade to black.
is a unique thriller/character study from the early 80s slasher craze. The killer at the forefront of the story is a film fanatic who dispatches folks using various movie scenes/characters as murder devices. It has a real Lucky McKee's May feel to it. In the end, it's a lot sadder and more dramatic of an experience than the many by-the-numbers Halloween clones of the time. It actually has a lot more in common with a film like Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver than it does any slasher film. The performances are strong, including a very early role for Mickey Rourke. This original horror classic was followed by 2 remakes, House of Wax starring Vincent Price and the infamous Paris Hilton-helmed 2000s era title of the same name. I believe that each film is strong in its own way. The 2000s one is completely its own thing, while the first 2 follow similar storylines. There is no doubt, however, that the original is my favorite. It has a stronger script featuring hilarious 1930s-style banter and a lead female character, a kooky reporter type, who is absent from the other versions. She is absolutely the highlight of the entire film. The scares and creep factor is also extremely high. For a 70-year-old horror film, it manages to stand the test of time. Dr. X is a horror comedy equal of sorts to Mystery of the Wax Museum, featuring most of the same people in front of and in back of the camera. Recently, Dr. X and Mystery of the Wax Museum have received a glorious color restoration. You should check them out. They're on Blu-ray, perhaps other places, but definitely on Blu-ray, and they're worth it. They were originally in black and white, as you can see right here. Dr. X features another kooky member of the press in its lead, this time a male. The script leans much more into the comedy, though. Fay Wray is especially very easily spooked in this one. Overall, it's quite a unique whodunit with an ambitious plot and a strong script.
Last Night in Soho is a visually stunning thriller. Think Hitchcock meets De Palma. It features impressive twists. One in particular is outstanding. High-concept mystery thrillers are a rarity, to say the least. But if you're going to get a director to make one, I suppose Edgar Wright would be at the top of that list. This genre doesn't require CGI. None of the best noir thrillers of the past 80 years have required it, but the digital artistry on display in Last Night in Soho only adds to the drama and thrills of the piece. And the effects work is never gratuitous. Every painstakingly beautiful and deliciously macabre sequence is always in service of the story at hand.
I must say, this is one gorgeous fever dream of a movie, similar in tone to Carnival of Souls, with a bit of Ravenous and In the Mouth of Madness thrown in. Of course, most of the movies post-date Messiah of Evil, which this movie's called, by many years. In a nutshell, the film plays like a literary art piece with hints of Lovecraft. One scene highlight would be the movie theater sequence towards the end. It is one of the most hauntingly fantastic bits of horror I've ever seen in a film. Oh man, I'm not joking with you. I'm really not. Anything for Jackson is a scare-inducing indie with 2 elderly protagonists who are also the antagonists. The duo kidnaps a pregnant woman so that their dead grandson can soul hop into her unborn baby. It's a really kooky plan. Plus, rather nefarious too, if you ask me. This one not only attempts to give you a willy of a chill, but it actually succeeds. The scares are reminiscent of those that director James Wan has been known to deliver. Man, let me tell you, there are so many movies called The Call, and a lot of them came out in 2020 apparently. That's when this movie did. Tobin Bell and Lin Shaye are both fabulous. The cast features strong performances all around. There is a twinge of A Nightmare on Elm Street in the film's plot, as well as EC Comics, although I was disappointed they didn't do more with that particular gimmick. The film is set in 1987 and features classic character stereotypes. To give you an idea of how egregious it is, the bully character actually wears a cross earring. I'm assuming this being 1987, he must be a fan of The Lost Boys? Yeah, that's gotta be it. The Call is oozing with creepy atmosphere, which is impressively pulled off on its modest budget. The keyword here is potential. Overall, I'd say this movie is definitely worth your consideration, at least for the Lin Shaye and Tobin Bell of it all. And look at that earring dangle! A parody of cannibal horror films and an early film of Shaw Hawk. We're Going to Eat You shares a similar indie feel with the early works of Peter Jackson, such as Bad Taste and bits of Dead Alive, in terms of gore and camera work. Hawk basically takes this overall style and blends it with a martial arts film. One of my favorite blendings of genre is martial arts with horror, but then again, I would pretty much love anything blended with horror. The film is overall a goofy affair in the best way. There are not many films that tackle this subject matter in such a way. If you are interested in checking this film out, it is now available for free on YouTube. You just gotta search the title. I do not mean to butcher names, but this may just happen. Niamh Algar of Raised by Wolves fame stars as a British film censor during the 1980s video nasty craze. The film is a hodgepodge of In the Mouth of Madness, New Nightmare, The Player, 8mm, Cigarette Burns, Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, and the rest of the Twin Peaks stuff, The Evil Dead, and The Vanishing. If you can believe it, yes, all of those things. But just to simplify it a bit more, it's a Lynchian tale told with the spirit of a giallo. A nightmarish film about grief using the age of the video nasty as its backdrop. I'm sure that I'm sure, Sheriff. Some of the music cues in this Italian horror gem are downright hilarious. There's this one scene where two characters get out of their cop car to a tune that sounds like the Channel 67 news van theme, if that is such a thing. Some of the dubbing is also quite hilarious, especially in a scene involving a conversation between an old married couple in a greenhouse. Be sure to keep an eye out for it. Slugs was certainly a hilariously goofy idea, but somehow they actually wound up pulling it off, for the most part. In the end, it makes for one slimy and gruesome experience with a surprisingly explosive ending. However, the script is laughably Italian, and the performances are on par with other Italian horror films of the past. I would describe them as a bit wooden and confused. Overall, I'd say that Slugs is a lot of fun in an Italian horror kind of way. Just think of it as the Blob's ridiculous cousin. Smiley Face Killers gives the viewer a genuinely unsettling feeling due to the lurking dread around every corner. The musical score works extremely well with the tone of the movie. Crispin Glover co-stars as an almost unrecognizable killer. His turn as a slasher is very menacing. The entire piece basically plays like Bret Easton Ellis's The Strangers. It's a scary film that subverts expectations. The victims are all athletic young men who are usually very capable of protecting themselves. This fact only adds to the film's uniqueness and tension. There is even a nude chase involving an actor that is reminiscent of the nude female chase in the My Bloody Valentine remake. This is merely one of the many ways that Smiley Face Killers plays with the norms of traditional media. Fried Barry is like a South African weirdo version of an already weird film, The Man Who Fell to Earth, starring David Bowie. The filmmakers claim that the lead of the film has never acted a day in his life, but I have to say that this is hands down one of the greatest performances I've ever seen on screen. Granted, it's mostly a silent performance, but that doesn't take away from its brilliance, as silent performances are supposed to be some of the hardest ones to give. At least that's what they say, right? The film is basically a tripped-out horror comedy experience featuring a series of vignettes starring the titular character, Fried Barry. Barry is a heroin addict in South Africa who just so happens to be possessed by an alien. So basically, it's like Starman meets E.T. meets the act of taking hallucinogenics. Saw 3 is another grotesque stage play featuring a stellar cast. Shawnee Smith is excellent, as is Tobin Bell. We see Jigsaw for the very last time in the present-day narrative of this ever-growing, convoluted franchise. Saw 3 perfectly builds upon the other two films where future sequels would tack on redundant new additions. The plot, which includes multiple ending twists, of course, as well as its gruesomely intricate traps, are intense, making for one of the better entries in the series. I think that Part 4 is a very important entry in the franchise because it complicates Jigsaw's motivations for killing. It also defines him as a Type A personality obsessive. Everything needs to be meticulously planned, and this is before he even gets his cancer diagnosis. But introducing the fact that his unborn child was killed by the very junkies that he and his wife were helping strengthens the overall premise. This new motivation is far more believable than just a regular guy getting diagnosed with cancer and thus deciding to become a serial killer. My recommendation would be to buy the Blu-ray for the Darren Lynn Bousman video diary. It's around 33 minutes long, extremely entertaining, and is worth the price of purchase alone. Today we have a double dose helping for you. Indie horror at its finest. starting with the boys from County Hell. The cast is terrific in this unique take on vampire lore. The film kind of plays as a commercial for how tough Irish people are. The script is clever, humorous, and full of heart. It clearly grabs inspiration from An American Werewolf in London, as well as other classic genre films. The effects are also top-notch, as is its musical score. Check this one out, please, will you? And now on to film number 2. The director of The Girl on the Third Floor continues his Clive Barker-esque cinematic storytelling with this Salem's Lot vibed vampire flick. Wow, I just realized both of these movies are indie vampire films. Look at that! Barbara Crampton and Larry Fessenden shine in their roles. I was especially impressed with Fessenden. I don't think I've ever seen him stronger. Not to take any shine away from Barbara Crampton, who is always amazing. My wife is a mental case. A man gives the most accurate description he can think of to describe his invalid wife. He hires a nurse to come to a cursed island and take care of her. But what is it that plagues his wife? Could it be voodoo? The nurse can't help but get involved with the drama of the island and winds up falling for the husband. That particular part could have been left out of the script, in my opinion, or her feelings could have been given more time to develop. I Walked with a Zombie was made long ago, before zombies ate flesh. It wasn't until George Romero's Night of the Living Dead when that trait was given to the infamous horror character known as Zombie. Now, no one will have it any other way. The film wears its spooky atmosphere like a gothic shroud. The film's plot tackles racism in a respectful way, which is refreshing for the 1940s. The island happens to be cursed because of its racist past. The film's black actors are depicted as real people who blend seamlessly within the island society, not just maids and chauffeurs, as was common in cinema for the time. The film also finds a menacing use for music. It is used as a weapon, as narration, and as a lurking monster of the piece. In one scene, a musician approaches the nurse character slowly. He plays his tune in her direction like Jason Voorhees with a machete. There is a narration that plays throughout the course of the film that works nicely. The nurse tells the story of the film in little bits. It's also a way of getting inside her head, hearing her fears and motivations. There are doctors. Better doctors. It is this line that drives the nurse to bring the invalid wife to the voodoo priest for healing. And what occurs in the woods is quite disturbing, especially the menacing appearance of a quite tall man with piercing dead eyes appearing mostly in silhouette. The cinematography is beautifully unsettling and the script is brilliantly top-notch. There are many memorable shots and lines for the viewers to take with them. This film is a semi-remake of the Val Lewton title, I Walked with a Zombie, and third installment of the Tales from the Crypt film series. Although, there was a third film that was originally supposed to be the third Tales from the Crypt movie, and that movie was The Frighteners. Through the process of making The Frighteners, it was decided that the material would be better suited for a standalone project. This official Tales from the Crypt Part 3 was also the last film and wound up being released direct to DVD with an extremely cheap version of the Crypt Keeper animatronic appearing in the opening and closing segments. While the writing in those sections was extremely poor, the rest of the film is fairly solid, featuring a decent cast and gruesome effects. Ritual does differ in tone from the other two films in the series, being more of a whodunit, and this is possibly why its release was handled improperly. They could have put a little bit more money into the film itself and shown tender love and care to its marketing campaign. This would wind up being the final death nail in the coffin of the Tales from the Crypt franchise. A few more positives would include the fact that Tim Curry is always fun to see, and that the story ends with a well-executed final twist. To put it in the simplest of ways, Nightbreed is Clive Barker's The Island of Dr. Moreau. The director's cut, released by Scream Factory, is the closest we will get to the infamous 3-hour Cabal cut that was talked about so many years ago, at least for now. Not all of Clive's materials translates well from page to screen. What we get here is Clive Barker unfiltered, and it is probably the closest example of a Barker novel come to life that we will ever experience. The film has a romance at the center of it that shares a similar feel to the Buffy and Angel dynamic from the popular Joss Whedon television show. This is further sold by the incredible resemblance that Craig Sheffer and David Boreanaz share. From its bizarre creature design to its rich, overblown mythology, Nightbreed is the most Clive Barker of Clive Barker movies. It also hosts a classic Danny Elfman musical score that sounds like everything else he was composing at the time. This would be a problem if that one sound wasn't so fantastic, and as always, it winds up only doing favors for the material. After several rewatches, it is safe for me to say that director David Cronenberg's performance is still the highlight of the film. Psychotic psychiatrist Decker rivals any of Barker's other villains, conjuring as much menace as 50 Cenobites combined. The film is also impressive to look at, hosting inventive Gothic production design. After rewatching the theatrical cut again of this film, I think that it is actually the superior cut. However, it does work a lot better once you've seen the director's cut. Then, with all of the blanks filled in your mind, you can sit back and enjoy legendary editor Mark Goldblatt's lightning-fast pace. Just to let you guys know, there may be some spoilers here. This extremely Canadian horror comedy is basically Rubber meets The Ring. Slacks is definitely a movie that some retail workers dreamt up on their lunch break, no doubt after being reprimanded by the potentially homicidal asshole manager. The film really comes alive in the second act. Before this, we are subjected to many comedy misfires and an extremely annoying celebrity character who serves as an obvious comment on YouTube/social media stars. The cast is strong for the most part, the highlight being Brett Donahue as the film's secondary villain. The gore is well done, but the pants puppetry is outstanding and quite hilarious. The choice to use the black pant pockets as eyes was ingenious. Where the Shudder exclusive Slacks dipped its corny toes into the pool of social media satire with lesser success, Shook goes full bore, as they say, and hits the mark completely. They capture the life and vapidity of influencers perfectly. From the opening scenes, faux red carpet display to the complete lack of regard for loved ones that our characters display when the opportunity of gaining multiple followers arises. Shook was written and directed by newcomer Jennifer Harrington, and I would say that she's definitely one to keep an eye out for in the horror world. She incorporates incredibly creative and unique methods of filmmaking/storytelling, including DMs in the form of physical manifestations and multiple split screens. This film is certainly not for dog lovers given the multiple dogs in peril throughout the film. The script is going for a feature-length version of the opening of Kevin Williamson's Scream, and it succeeds while still keeping its own identity. There are a few moments in the script where I asked, "Why the hell is she doing that?" referring to the main protagonist, but I suppose that that's like most horror films, isn't it? Also, one character expresses her shame for being a cashier, but I say Whole Foods is nothing to scoff at. That's like top-tier cashier work. It's nothing to cry about, and it's certainly not anything to stage a Scream/Saw-like home invasion scenario with your best friend at the center of it. Spoiler alert. I'm sorry to say it, but this franchise is still about the legacy characters for me. And unfortunately, those guys are dropping like flies. I couldn't find a single new character to latch onto in any real way. My favorite non-legacy moments were involving characters that didn't even survive the movie. I tend to enjoy anything that Jack Quaid does, from his role in Amazon's The Boys to his appearance on Red Letter Media's Best of the Worst. So his role in 2022's Scream is certainly on my highlight list. The only other one worth mentioning would be how actress Mikey Madison's deaths in both Scream and Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood mirror each other for some reason. This decision came off so random while at the same time perfectly designed for the film. It reminded me of how Hans Zimmer's musical score for Broken Arrow was repurposed for Scream 2. For some reason. In 1997, they decided to take one movie's music, a recent and very popular movie at that, and reuse it for Dewey's theme. This wouldn't happen again until a few years later when Quentin Tarantino started repurposing music for every one of his films, starting with the Kill Bill movies. Unless you count the time that some of the music for Necronomicon Book of the Dead, directed by Brian Yuzna, the music in that film was repurposed for one of the Dexter themes. Then again, both that TV show and that movie had the same composer, so that makes sense, I suppose. So anyway, take that peculiar choice and mix that with Michael Keaton popping up in both Jackie Brown and Out of Sight as the same character, and you have yourself a fair comparison of Scream's hair-blazing finale. The de-aged Billy Loomis hallucinations were a pleasant surprise. I guess that element would be classified as a hybrid of both legacy and new. I also enjoyed the fact that they never clearly explain whether Billy Loomis is an honest-to-goodness ghost, merely being used as an inner monologue device, or whether his appearance is surefire proof of the film's main protagonist being absolutely batshit daffy. I really hope that they're heading in the direction of batshit daffy, because at least that would be interesting. The filmmakers do a good job of handling the suspense. The script is pretty weak sauce when compared to the work of Kevin Williamson, but the decision to make Scream 5 about requels was ultimately the right one. I give them much props for commenting on the current climate of cinema. After all, if the Scream franchise has one job, it's surely that. I really did appreciate the respect that they showed the rest of the series. There was obvious care involved. Overall, I had a good time with Scream 2022. I love how the title is both a classic cringeworthy requel move, as well as a comment on cringeworthy requel titles. I have my fingers crossed that they don't completely drop the ball from here. I do find that Ghostface Takes Manhattan concept they're brewing pretty promising. When this film is not obsessed with tying up every little loose end of the franchise's overarching plot, it refreshingly takes cues from Saw 2 and goes full-on bottle film. It is also during these segments where the film successfully reconnects with its five strangers in search of an exit roots. This is also the entry where sadistic cop Hoffman officially becomes our new big bad. I used to hold Saw 6 in my top 3 Saw films before I rewatched it, and I gotta say it dropped down a peg since my last watch. I was left with a bit of a detached feeling this time around, which was surprising due to its compelling subject matter. Without a doubt, this is the Saw film with the most to say. Finally, the franchise about a maniacal dying man tackles the healthcare system. It does so strictly by dissecting and overtly criticizing the insurance companies. This entry mostly apes on the Saw 3 format, a main protagonist of sorts moving from room to room while being forced to make a series of choices. There are some strong moments, mostly Tobin Bell scenes, and some memorable ones as well, the most notable one being the carousel trap, which is definitely a fan favorite. The sadistic game show continues, and this time in 3D! Although this unfortunately adds a glossy, unreal look to the film that may ruin the experience for some viewers. The performances are good though. Sean Patrick Flannery fits well in the lead, and a police detective played by Chad E. Donella of Final Destination fame adds some quirky flavor to the bunch. I was certain he had gone to the Brad Pitt School of Acting though, because I'm pretty sure he's doing a Detective Mills impersonation through the whole movie. This 7th chapter in the series also has the most downer of endings, but the plus side is that we finally get to see the reverse bear trap payoff in all its glorious glory. In closing, I'd say that Detective Hoffman gets a bad rap because he has to be the most ruthless killer cop to grace the screen since Maniac Cop. What is this, a homicide or a bad B movie? I'd say it's a B movie alright, but at least it's a good one. Creeps is a hodgepodge of every bit of genre material that director Fred Dekker ever consumed. The trio at the center of the film share great chemistry, and this is certainly Tom Atkins' best role. He strolls in right out of a noir movie and delivers catchy one-liners the entire time. For a suicidal cop on the edge, he sure seems to be having a blast. Have you ever seen a movie where the characters share last names with horror directors? Well, this is the movie that originated that concept. And they aren't obscure horror directors either. We're talking big leagues here. There's even one scene where we get 4 of them delivered in rapid succession via character introductions. Dekker was certainly not going for subtlety here. The script is sharp, and its overall execution is very impressive for a first-time filmmaker. A few highlights worth mentioning would be as follows. We get a spooky zombie David Paymer on a slab, a Mad Max homage involving a bus driver's bulging eyeballs, and a Joe Dante-style Walter Paisley appearance courtesy of the great Dick Miller. This one's also an equal opportunity horror film. There are both zombie cats and zombie dogs on display. Finally, we close out the film with an amazing slam-bang zombie battle featuring some kick-ass flamethrower action. Beware the moon, David. The gratuitous Frank Oz cameo is a must in John Landis Productions, and I'd say that this one doesn't disappoint. The script is very clever and moves by at a lightning pace. It is obviously inspired by Universal Studios' The Wolfman, although Landis rewrites the werewolf lore a lot. He jettisons some, and even includes a few of his own, like ghostly visits from the dead, and vivid nightmares preceding the werewolf's first change. Since the film was made by a cinephile, there are many references to other films and pop culture made by the characters. This may have been the first time that this occurred in a horror movie. The cast is full of great British character actors, including Jenny Agutter in the romantic lead. David Naughton gives off a sympathetic, boyish charm, and Griffin Dunne never fails to steal each scene that he's in. Agutter and Naughton share amazing chemistry, which only helps to sell the romance at the center of the tale. The script relies on a farcical British humor. This is due to the film's setting as well as the humor of its director. As far as the scares go, I've always found the horrific dream sequences the most memorable. They occur at a machine gun's pace towards the middle of the film, each one more gory and twisted than the last. Then of course, there's the technologically mind-blowing transformation sequence which was cutting edge at the time and still holds up to this day. I also like how the script was written to be somewhat ambiguous. Before the transformation scene occurs, the whole movie could be in the lead character's head, all being brought on by the trauma of witnessing his good friend's death. The idea could have been planted in his head by his friend Jack and the paranoid townsfolk at the pub. This could have been enough to bring forth the nightmares and hallucinations. Of course, this winds up not being the case at all. Another Landis touch / Easter egg would be the moment where the transforming werewolf takes a giant fourth wall breaking glance at the camera, a classic Landis style wink at the audience. An American Werewolf in London is probably the best werewolf movie ever made, plus I put it right up there with David Cronenberg's The Fly as far as tragic horror romances go. Drag Me to Hell is a silly and very disgusting fun time at the movies from director Sam Raimi. Some of the CGI is a bit wonky, but other than that, it remains a true modern classic. Raimi uses every tool that he's ever learned over the years and throws it into this one movie. It also plays as a tribute to his own filmography, and in certain ways is a spiritual sequel to the Evil Dead series. This is especially apparent during the seance scene where there is Deadite-inspired jig dancing and cocky, mischievous line delivery, including a crazy, kooky goat. The Christopher Young musical score is fantastic, one of the best he's ever done in fact, and the film's shocking ending is set up extremely well in its cleverly constructed screenplay. There is an amazing sequence with a runaway car that speeds away while Claudia Christensen is handcuffed to it. Really exciting stuff. There is also a snippet of chainsaw action, although not with Bruce Campbell, believe it or not. He is instead given the old Janet Leigh treatment in this movie. You'll have to experience the first Maniac Cop if you want that true Bruce Campbell experience. Although, I would have to say it's not really required to see the first Maniac Cop in order to fully enjoy this one. You get a nice recap in the beginning, that's all you really need. They fill you in with the rest or the backstory and all that. Robert Davi is awesome as the lead protagonist, a huge turn from his ruthless Bond villain in License to Kill. Here is another classic Larry Cohen script based in New York. I really love the Maniac Cop concept. This is surely one of the wildest and most successfully executed sequels ever made. It is beautifully shot and has top-notch action set pieces and stunt work on display, especially the fire stunts at the end. They're quite exquisite. The plot kind of plays like Batman without the Batman. It's hard to figure out Matt Cordell's motivations at times, though. Gotta be honest with you. April Fool's Day has more in common with films based on the works of Agatha Christie than films of the 80s slasher craze, although it still manages to hold true to most of the 80s slasher tropes. It kind of walks the line between classy and sleazy slasher for the entire length of the film, although it certainly leans more towards classy mystery. It is very much a hangout film. A lot of the dialogue feels improvised. It's one of those movies that is made or broken by the strength of its characters. I personally think it works in this respect. The characters are fun enough to not mind spending a secluded weekend with. Plus, it doesn't hurt that the cast is very strong, especially for an 80s slasher. I'd say that the film would pair particularly well with David Fincher's The Game. There are many Easter eggs and homages thrown in from the first film as well as other films such as Exorcist III and its infamous crash zoom hallway kill. From the first film, they bring back a jokey nod to the prank phone calls and a flip on the plastic bag wearing victim in the attic. Also the original cover art, by the way. Plot-wise, Black Christmas 2019 would pair nicely with The Rage Carrie 2. Carrie Elwes, or Elwes, whatever you prefer, happens to give his best performance in years. It's one of his rare villain roles. Imogen Poots also shines in her leading spot. The film works as a satire on Gamergate and the male-sided hatred of the female recasting of reboots. The irony not being lost that the film itself is a reboot. It's a unique idea for a film that I'm surprised took this long to come to fruition. The events of the film all come to a boil when the climax erupts in a literal battle of the sexes. The new Black Christmas is a remake with something new to say. All of the best remakes hold this quality. It fearlessly brings the new, while at the same time maintaining that biting feminist quality of the original. Something about that Jigsaw reveal where Tobin Bell pulls back his black hood gave me honest-to-goodness goosebumps. It was just really good to see him again, you know? And that is the moment when I realized Jigsaw's importance to the series as well as the horror genre as a whole. It was long overdue that we received an intellectual psychopath as a slasher villain, someone to fit comfortably on the shelf next to Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter. And while he may lack the strength and capability of brutish on-screen killers like Jason or Michael Myers, he certainly makes up for it in mechanical efficiency and maniacal genius. Tobin Bell handles the complexities of being an eccentric cult leader very well, if you ask me, and you can always be rest assured that he will treat the material with the same sincerity and care as most actors would treat Shakespeare's Hamlet or a pretentious indie drama, you know? I have had great respect for the Spierig brothers since I saw their micro-budget zombie flick Undead. When I saw their underrated and underseen masterpiece Predestination, I knew I would be a fan for life. I think that they were a fine choice for the revival of the Saw series. I have to say, it wasn't quite what I expected when I first saw it. However, it has proven to be the type of film that grows on you, and I've enjoyed it more and more with each viewing. And finally, we arrive to the current state of things in the Saw franchise, with Darren Lynn Bousman's return to Spiral from the Book of Saw. Bousman brings the Saw franchise back to its David Fincher's Seven roots for this new spin-off based on an idea from comedian Chris Rock, believe it or not. The film is a buddy cop thriller of sorts. The big difference this time around is the film's humorous script, no doubt a contribution of Rock's. Samuel L. Jackson's inclusion in the cast is also refreshing. The film definitely has a point of view and has something to say, a message if you will. I'm not 100% sure exactly what that message is. I think they could have landed it a little bit better. It was in this respect that I expected a lot more from this movie, and it's unfortunate that they didn't push the metaphor or whatever message they were spinning a little bit further, so it would be clearer and more powerful. I think there's a great movie here, somewhere, that could be perhaps fixed in the editing or reworking of the script, but the final product that we have just isn't up to snuff. Period. Not to say that Spiral is a bad movie, because it's not, and I actually wouldn't mind them heading down this direction with the series, even though I know now that they're not, since it's already been announced that the next Saw movie that we're going to be receiving is going to be a Jigsaw prequel, where Tobin Bell's going to be returning. How they're going to pull that off, I have no idea. I guess de-aging makeup or CGI de-aging technology, I guess. I mean, we're going to have to see. But you know what? I'm here for whatever they got. More Tobin Bell can't be a bad thing. It can never be a bad thing. And I know I've asked for it before, and now I'm getting it, so I'm actually kind of happy. John Carpenter finally makes a Western. It's exploitative, full of vampires, mucho machismo, and features the dropping of multiple Padre bombs throughout the course of the film. James Woods plays himself in the guise of vampire hunter Jack Crow. He's cold, wounded, and made of stone. After his family was murdered by vampires, he was raised up by the church to be a heartless vampire-killing machine. There's not much more to the character, really, and you're either on board with this fact or you're not. The rest of his team is similar, including Daniel Baldwin as his right-hand man. This movie is basically just tough guys doing tough guy shit. Just the way that John Carpenter likes it, you know? Twin Peaks star Sheryl Lee gives a terrific performance, arguably unworthy of this film. She holds a psychic link with the master vampire and is exploited harshly for this ability by the main protagonists. Lee conveys said psychic powers by using her entire body and face in an impressive display of animalistic convulsions. It's almost like a form of interpretive dance full of bulging eyes and erratic twitches. I truly have never seen anything like it before, or since. There are a lot of one-note characters in this film, including the master vampire himself, played by Karate Kid 3-star Thomas Ian Griffith. Perhaps his portrayal can be excused by the fact that the vampires in this film are portrayed as rabid animals with minimal lines. This point is further driven home via an erratically delivered James Woods monologue midway into the film. Most of their human characteristics have been abolished by the vampiric virus inside of them, and perhaps the team of vampire hunters are meant to mirror their vampiric foes. As I said, you're either on board with these choices or you're not. John Carpenter's Western-inspired score is one of his best, featuring twangy, musical-bound rock guitars and haunting synthesizers. If there's one thing that can't be denied about John Carpenter's vampires, it's that everything belongs. From the music, to the camera work / production design, to the characters and their performances, every piece of the pie makes a cohesive whole. Whether this particular pie is your taste or not will have to be determined by the individual taking the bite. This is an excellent horror anthology with a strong star-studded cast. Also known as the unofficial Creepshow 3, Tales from the Dark Side the movie was adapted from a television show of the same name. It was created by the makers of Creepshow and aired for several years in the late 80s. The show would later come back in the form of a spin-offy anthology called Monsters. Much like the third season of Masters of Horror was basically the network television revival show Fear itself. Most of the film's star power is relegated to its first tale. This mummy-led revenge story features up-and-coming actors Julianne Moore, Steve Buscemi, and Christian Slater. Just a wild coincidence, really, that they would all blow up in the way they did. The entire film has a morbidly humorous charm to it, from the Blondie-led wraparound about a witch preparing an annoyingly chatty dinner, to the gargoyle who is deadly serious about her promises. Both shows shared the same wit as did the Creepshow films. The middle tale was inspired by a Stephen King story about a murderous cat and the hitman hired to snuff it out. This tale was originally meant to appear in a previous Creepshow installment, and features one of the most shockingly macabre moments in the entire film. If you've heard the phrase, stick a sock in it, all you have to do is replace the word sock with cat in order to give you a good idea of the moment I'm speaking of.
Chapel.